Welcome to the Steady Anchor Podcast, a podcast on Christian faith and practice, highlighting doctrine and discipleship in the local church. I'm Luke, and welcome to the show. Welcome back to the Steady Anchor Podcast. I'm Luke, your host. Today, on episode 31, we're continuing a conversation from last week with Pastor Charlie from 1-7 Church. If you haven't heard that episode, it was great and a lot of fun to record. Go ahead and go back and listen to that now. But today we're going to continue on a conversation specifically on how we as Christians respond to this whole coronavirus issue. I'm sure at this point, everyone's heard someone give some take, talk about something, or give maybe some crazy crackpot response to this whole issue. But I think it's still good and worthwhile. I don't want to flood the market with coronavirus conversations, but I think it is important, especially from a pastor's perspective, to go through and talk about how the church and Christians individually should respond to this, how we love one another, how we show compassion, how we witness to one another, and how we maintain personal discipleship. So, Pastor Charlie, thank you for coming back on the show.
Thanks again for having me, Luke. Appreciate it.
All right. So in listening time, this is a week later, but in recording time, this is just picked up where we were left off last week. So if you want to just hop right in, how in your timeline did this whole thing develop? How did it first come to your mind, and how quickly did the circumstances change?
Yeah, boy, I remember, here's the thing. I think probably maybe a lot of people that are listening, I feel like all of my days have blurred together. I feel like that there's January, February, and then just a blur of blob. Right?
March was half a year long. And
yeah, that's right. So my earliest remembrance of I've heard about it, and we started seeing some things come out of China and that type of thing, and hear about that. But then the first real time that I remember thinking through it is when my daughter had scheduled a trip to go out and see my wife's aunt in Florida, her and a friend of hers. And that was in March. And I remember there going, oh man, this is dicey. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And should she even go or should she not go? And there was so much information that was, I would say, conflicting. And we just didn't know what was true, what wasn't true. Mm-hmm. She ended up going out there, spending a week out there. And when she flew back, that's when we knew, okay, things are definitely, we should probably really consider this thing. She flew back and there was 11 people on her flight. And so we knew, okay, wow. So yeah. And so from there we started, I remember originally just thinking, okay, it's very much, and again, I don't say this to set off to get you a bunch of emails, right? but I know that originally it was just very much hey, this thing is just like the flu, and just keep washing your hands and blah blah blah. And I know that there's maybe some people listening who are going, that is true. I'm not here to tell. I'm no doctor, and so I'm not here to tell you. I'd say live according to your conscience and use wisdom as it regards whether or not the seriousness of this thing. But I remember at that moment we're okay, this is going to be a larger impact. And then we started talking about not having groups of larger than 150, and so we started,
which is fine for us.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we slipped right under. Yeah, with students, we're under that. and then it was at that point that the lead team started to gather and say, "Hey, just because we're under that, do we not meet? Should we?"
Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. Yeah.
No, right. And so it was at that time. I don't know if you'll remember this. It was that time that we did suspend our service before we had to by a week. And then the following week, or even after, maybe the same week after we had announced that decision, they announced it was, you got to be under 50 and then under 10. And I think at that point we were already at the point they said 150, we were already committed to okay, let's just ride this thing out. Let's separate and let's figure out what the new normal looks like for us.
Yeah, because at first it was such a strange thing. It was because back in January, you start hearing of this virus in China and you're like, oh, that's unfortunate. I hope they have that contained. I hope it doesn't get anywhere. And then as it progresses until it really starts hitting that fever pitch in the middle of March, no one's really sure what's going on. And that perception, it's like a flu. It's not super dangerous. Take the precautions that you normally would and expected. This isn't going to affect life at all. But I remember we were on spring break when all of this kind of hit the fan in the U.S. where on Monday, we were spending the day at the beach in Virginia. Tuesday, we're relaxing and we're having guy time, and the girls had their time. It was a lot of fun. And then Wednesday, we get an email that's like the coronavirus. We're not doing chapel anymore, but our classes are still going to meet. And then like 2 days later, we're gone. We can't do anything. So come back from spring break, get your stuff and go home. Yeah. And so just very quickly, we're all like, what is happening?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was probably the catalyst for, I think, initially I felt like there was a wave of like anxiety and fear. And I don't know that it was much, I don't want to say factually based, but just more of an emotional response to like, hey, this thing was like, we were guarded against it, and like, okay, let's take some precaution. And then suddenly everything outside changed, right? It wasn't just our own actions that changed. Now we're shutting stuff down. Everybody's like, whoa, this is a bigger deal. How much of a bigger deal? And it just, I think when it gets to the line, when it crosses the line of upsetting your daily routine, you go, uh-oh, right? I mean, honestly, that's when it starts to hit home that way, you're like, oh, now I'm not the master of my domain anymore. Like now somebody is telling me I can't do this. It must be a bigger issue.
Yeah.
There's anxiety there. Yeah.
Yeah. And just the uncertainty of it all, how it all it all suddenly is just everything's changing. Yeah. Plans get canceled. Not sure what I'm going to do. Not sure where I'm going to go. So like at first I wasn't sure where I was going to go because my mom and my dad, like my parents are split and I hadn't planned on coming home for another 2 months. And so just trying to figure all that out. And with the uncertainty of very quickly life as a whole is changing and the whole international perspective suddenly shifts to the realization that lives are in danger and my life could be in danger. And so just like, especially we as Christians have that sure hope, which is sometimes hard to see in the moment, but the confidence that God's working all things for our good and that no evil can touch us outside of his plan, outside of him allowing it to happen for whatever reason. But that's really difficult to deal with in life. Like it's easy to say that intellectually and quote Bible verses, but to really experience that peace is a whole nother issue altogether.
Yeah. Yeah. When Paul says, I'm stuck between two, right? Like King James, and I memorized, I'm in the strait betwixt two, he says, right? That wanted to depart and be with Christ, which is far better, but staying here for your benefit. And you go, yeah, that's really easy to quote that until you go, to depart with Christ is far better many, many decades down the road, right? Like, I mean, that's true, right? We have that anxiety. Yeah. Yep.
So how have we as 1-7 Church been responding to this? How have we looked to get around all of these issues and still continue to meet as best we can?
Yeah. And so like most churches, well, I won't say like most churches, like many churches, we didn't have a necessarily super well thought out online presence. We had our website and we would do our weekly messages, but we didn't really think beyond that, how we could leverage technology. And we always knew that it was available. We just never seized the moment to utilize technology to engage, like we've said before in the last episode, 1-7, meaning that we want to live out on mission and that faith should affect the way we live one day at a time, 7 days a week. How do we do that now, right? And,
when you can't meet any day of the week.
Yeah, that's right. And I've talked to a couple other pastors, and one of the things I said, guys, by design, like by our title, by our name, we were designed for a moment like this, right? That we want to really find ways to connect throughout the week. And so, like so many other churches, we went to online services. We did Zoom calls, and so that's been our rhythm right now, is recording the message in my house, in my basement, and I record them earlier in the week and then post them on Sunday mornings, just because I essentially live in a zoo, right? I've got a dog that's gonna bark. Got a 7-year-old that could come around riding a unicycle and juggling. A teenage boy that's right outside the room where I record, and so there's so many variables. So I record them late at night, and then we post them on Sunday mornings. hope that doesn't burst the illusion of the Sunday morning worship service for anybody.
Why is it dark
anyway.
outside his window? I don't understand.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember seeing your first recorded sermon. In the background, you had like a display case, a glass display case in the background. I remember thinking, like, if he keeps doing this here, he has to do something strange with that. Like, there's got to be like something in that display case different every week. Like, in 1 week, it's like a watermelon, and the next week, it's like a sword or something.
Exactly. I have a sword. I could have put a sword in there. I'll see if the sword makes an appearance this week. We'll see if that happens. Yeah, that's awesome.
Anyway, yeah. So I know we have like a Facebook group, and we're doing those kind of live prayer times and times to share our worries and concerns, but also to offer help. So if you could say a word about those.
Yeah. One of the things that we did, and we had talked about for a while, and I think this was just the catalyst to do it, is we created a private Facebook page for our church. And if anybody here is listening and they're a part of the 1-7 family, they're not a part of that, just go ahead and tell them to get a hold of me. Tell them, like, they're not listening to me now. I feel like this whole podcasting technology is so new to me. But anyway, go ahead and get a hold of me and we'll add you to that group. But long story short is we want to create a private group just for the 1-7 church family, that we could share prayer requests that we maybe didn't want public, share anything we may be struggling with, and also share like just some really practical needs. If anybody needed food, or if anybody needed a lawnmower, or somebody else had an extra lawnmower or a dishwasher, or washing machine, anybody need these things. And it was a way for us to kind of live out that Acts 2, having all things in common, is to say, hey, I've got some stuff, and rather than just drop it off somewhere or to sell it to somebody on Facebook Marketplace, does anybody in our church need it, right? And to be able to do those things. And I think it's going to serve our church well for years to come. I think if we take that serious, we continue to lean into that. I think that'll be super helpful, building community and sharing our stuff like that, and being an expression of what Christ has given us and how we can live open-handed. But then beyond that, we do 2 Zoom calls a week. We do one on Thursday evenings that just the time to get together. There's usually a short devotional or thought from the scripture, and then just catching up. Like, hey, where have you seen God at work in the world? Like we say all the time, John 7, Jesus said the Father is always at work. So we believe that. We believe this didn't take Jesus by surprise. We believe that the Father is working through it for our benefit and for his glory. And so where do we see that? And how can we be praying for the different interactions that people are having? And also recognizing that this is a time of anxiety and depression. Hey, how can we serve you? Like, hey, what's going on? And how can we share? How can we, the scriptures are pretty clear that we should bear one another's burdens. How do we do that in quarantine? I think this is one of the ways to do that. And then on Sunday evening, we were doing the same thing, but we've just made a shift that Sunday evening time is going to be more of a prayer time. We're going to just spend.
Oop, I think I lost you. Hello. Oh, there you are.
That's probably not good.
And we're back.
How do you want to handle that?
It's okay. We can just keep going.
Hold on. I'm trying to figure out if it's you or if it's me.
I don't know. Yeah, I can edit this out. If anyone who's watching on the YouTube video, they'll hear this, but that's only like 4 people anyway. So I'll cut it out of the podcast. So
fair enough. So should I just start talking about the Acts 2:42 again, or the Connect 1-7 page again?
Yeah. So you cut out as you were saying what we were doing on Sunday night. So
okay. So why don't we just start there?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And so also like the Sunday night Zoom calls that we're doing, we're transitioning those now to they're going to be a more of a time of prayer, of like a concert of prayer, so to speak, where there'll be just some directed prayer, like, hey, let's take the next 10 minutes or so and let's pray for our community. Let's take the next 10 and pray for our church or these needs in our church, to get the church praying for one another again in a gathered sense. So,
yeah, and I think that's great. Yeah. Like just thinking through, and this is a thought that I had kind of randomly when we started talking about this. I think it's definitely a good thing that a lot of good and healthy churches are getting onto social media now, or being able to connect to the people in new ways, or being able to spread out their teaching in ways that they had never really considered or prepared themselves for beforehand. So I think there's a lot of good coming out of this. But
For sure.
there's also the chance of the downside of if after this whole crisis goes away, people become too dependent on social media and stuff like this. And so how do you think we as Christians, who are now moving mostly online, how do we keep the right perspective to not become so dependent on social media and internet community that we devalue in-person community when all this is over?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And the temptation is certainly there. I think one of the things that's important to recognize is there's so many one another's that you can't, you really can't live out unless you're face to face, right?
Mm.
I think it's just important for us to be. There's something to be said about being together, the gathering of saints. It gives us a reminder of a picture, if you will, of what it will be like in the kingdom. And I think that's important. I think it's important for us to come together to celebrate the baptism and the sacraments, right? I think that matters.
Mm.
There's just something about gathering in this regard that um, I think it causes some anxiety that even we don't think through. Like, for instance, when it pauses, or when there's think about this for a minute, Luke. If there's a moment of silence when you and I are sitting at Starbucks, neither one of us have a moment of anxiety.
Yeah.
But if there's a pause here, we go, "Uh-oh, is it frozen? Is it not?"
Yeah.
Even if it's a split second, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're burning some mental energy to think, "Oh," and I just think there's something that's far more healthy
Yeah.
for us to be face to face. There's something to be said about being able to hug your brothers and sisters in Christ, and to be able to linger and to have conversations that people can walk up to and join, or can leave, and we don't have some of that freedom
Mm-hmm.
online, right? And so um, I think I mean, in the scriptures, aside from the scriptures commanding that we don't forsake the assembling of ourselves together, I think that we should. There's so many benefits to that, and here's the bottom line: is that you can find better teachers online than me, and so we don't come together for that purpose. We don't come
Mm.
together because, oh yeah, we can get it online now. That's not the reason we've gathered
Yeah.
ever. Is that right?
Yeah. It's not a
We
commodity to just internet shop for.
It's right, and so if that were the goal, then you'd be able to find much better teachers on any topic you want to hear. But we think there's something to be said about gathering together with the saints, being able to encourage one another as the service is ending, and we've heard from the word, be able to encourage one another where we're at in the gospel with those things, and not just consume, but to take what we've heard and to be able to use that to encourage one another after the service, I think is meaningful, and not something that we have the opportunity to do online.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that really matters. The opportunity to linger and to pray with somebody as the word stirs our affection for Jesus or convicts us of sin. It's nice to have brothers and sisters that will pray with us and for us and encourage us. And when we're watching a video on Facebook that's not live anyway, the best you can do is leave a comment.
Yeah.
And I think you find that leaves you wanting in
Mm-hmm.
regards to community. So
Yeah, there's only this is maybe a secondary substitute to kind of fill in the gap for what we're doing in church. But again, like you said, it's not permanent, and it's definitely not.
Luca,
It's
it
definitely
sounds
not.
like I'm talking with RoboCop right now. All that sounded robotic. I couldn't hear anything you said.
All right, is it back now? I can hear you clearly. Are we good?
Oh man,
Are we back?
here's another reason. Now it is. Yeah, I'm saying yes, we are back. I'm like, here's another reason we should gather live.
I'll
Never
leave.
get frozen.
I'll leave
Never
that one
do
in.
this in mid.
I'll leave that in specifically for the illustration.
Yes.
So yeah, I was just talking about how like
That's
this
awesome.
can be a useful substitute, but it can never measure up to what God has intended for us in gathering together.
Oh man.
Yeah. So, am I frozen again? Hello?
Yeah, Luke, the only thing I heard was gathering together. The only thing I heard was gathering together. And
That's
so
that's all you need to
yeah.
hear.
Okay, fair enough.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So, assuming that the internet holds up, it might be on my point at this point. I want to ask one more question, specifically focusing on 3 areas. So,
Okay.
just for whoever's listening to this, to all Christians in general, how do we live out faithfully in uncertain times like this? So,
Yeah.
how specifically do we love one another and serve our community well in the midst of this craziness? How do we continue to be a witness to the hope and truth of the gospel? And how do we maintain personal discipline to make sure that we're not slacking off or falling into despair?
Yeah, it's really good. We certainly are not exempt, even though we are in isolation, from Jesus' command to love our neighbor and
Mm-hmm.
to love them as ourselves. And I think there's something to be said about that, Luke, that when we say, the golden rule of do unto others as you'd have them do to you, like probably in very similar ways to the way that you would feel loved and cared for in this time. I think your neighbors, whether they be real neighbors or just friends that you have that are now scattered,
Mm-hmm.
probably be cared for the same way, whether it's sending them a text, a card, an email, sending them something via the mail, just let them know you're thinking of them. Practical ways of letting people know that you're thinking of them and caring for them goes a long way. Just a text that says, how are you doing and how can I pray for you could make all the difference in someone's day, right?
Mm-hmm.
I say this all the time when I do premarital counseling, and I said it in church, and I'll just keep on saying it. Guys, just remember that what goes without saying needs to be said.
Mm.
Just don't assume that and I would also say that this is true not just to your neighbor, but the people that are living under the same roof as you.
Yeah.
What goes without saying needs to be said, which just is my way of saying, like, don't just assume that people go, oh, well, my son knows that I love him. Uh, Man, he
Yeah.
might be really, really feeling bad because of being isolated from his friends and missing his friends at school. Maybe it might do him really good for me just to go, hey, dude, if I told you lately that I'm super proud of you and I love you, man, like that goes a really long way. And so I'd
Mm-hmm.
encourage you just by the simple acts of service like that. And then there's the very practical ways that we can serve, whether it's providing food for people who are maybe have been laid off, out of work, supporting small businesses
Mm-hmm.
intentionally in our community that are open, that aren't part of large chains, that don't have maybe the sustainable resources that maybe the mom and pop does down the street. If you're going to
Mm-hmm.
go out and grab dinner from a place out, maybe consider doing that.
Yeah. Like
Um,
Connect Roasters if you're in the market for coffee.
Exactly like Connect Roasters. You can find those guys, get yourself some great coffee that's on mission. So, right, it's right. Um, I would also
Now
say,
he has to
like,
come on.
so that's right. Yeah, he's completely obligated to have Caleb on at this point. So the other thing I would say is that, like, one of the things that our church has really done well is that, so we have a partnership when everything's normal. We have a partnership with one of the schools here in our community, and we help meet needs for the classrooms, for parents, and for students. And we've been able to serve. They are currently serving over, I think, 300 people a day are going through, just getting food that the school would have used for lunches or giving
Yeah.
to families. And so, just from a relationship that I have with a gentleman at a church I used to pastor, who I knew works at a warehouse, I said, "Hey, I know that when there's a shelf life for the food that they have there, the food isn't expired, but they can't keep it in the warehouse any longer than X amount of days.
Mm-hmm.
So we've donated literally thousands of pounds of food just through
Wow.
them. And so there are ways that you can serve the community just by going, well, what do I have that somebody else might may need, right? Like, man, I just think as it gets warmer, maybe cutting the grass for your elderly neighbor,
Mm-hmm.
or just those types of things are things we can do just as expressions of going, hey, just want to let you know that I care for you. You are probably, I don't know this to be true, but I would guess, if I had to guess, in the next few weeks, as things begin to warm up, if they ever do, because we're in Illinois, I would suspect that you're going to see your neighbors out and about more than you probably have in a really long time. Those that are working from home, out jogging or walking the dog or the kids, get out, move around. It's going to be good for,
Yeah.
like, the third question you asked me, like, just for mental capacity, right? Get out, move around, and have conversations from a 6 foot distance. Have a conversation right across the street, and just, you know, and be the person that says, hey, do you guys need anything? Is there anything you need? Right. And there is, and it's bigger than what you can do. Bring it to the community of God's people, right? Bring it to the
Mm-hmm.
church and go, hey, my neighbor needs. X, Y, or Z, and let's see if we can't meet it being an expression of the love of God in word and deed. So that's what I would say: how to love your friends, your family, your neighbors. It's also how to live on mission,
Hmm.
and then just take care of yourself. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, Luke, that the majority of people who are listening to this podcast are probably very eager and willing to serve the people in their lives, to serve their neighbors, to serve their families. The
Mm.
things that we are probably not willing and eager to do is to share our own need and our own brokenness and our own
Yeah.
struggle, right? That's very hard. But part of the just by default, when Jesus says, love one another and bear one another's burdens, we always say, well, it's my job to bear others' burdens. Yeah, but if you look at that scripture, if we don't know what the burden is, we can't bear it. And
Yeah.
so we need to confess not only our sins but our needs to one another,
Yeah.
and share what tempts you. If you're struggling with temptation because you're on lockdown and you're not as spiritually strong because you're outside of the community, share what tempts you with a trusted brother or sister that they might be able to pray with you. But I'm just telling you that depression is rising.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, Kids being abused is on the
Yeah.
rise, and the domestic violence on the rise, just because these are byproducts of people who are without hope, who are feeling pressure, who are depressed, and who are locked in close quarters with people that really well, and may start to rub you the wrong way after a certain period of
Hmm.
time. And this is true in the church as well. And so if you're depressed, if you are feeling anxious, if even maybe not depressed for weeks on end, but just today's a really bad day,
Yeah.
share that with somebody. Share it with somebody.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's all great.
Yep.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
I think that was all really helpful.
I hope so.
One thing I wanted to comment and expand on is near the beginning, you talked about how reaching out and giving the encouragement to your neighbor that you would enjoy receiving. And even the fact that in a growing digital community, we have our digital neighborhood is expanded more than ever in the human history. So my
True.
neighbor now is not just relegated to the person within 200 feet of my front door. Now my
Yeah.
neighbor can be in another country even. And
Yeah.
so like
That's so true.
just being able to take advantage of the things that we've been blessed by as
Yeah.
Christians living in the 21st century. And I know like
Yeah.
this is something that I am terrible at. I suck at having these digital conversations, especially like just only relying on texting people and
Mhm.
FaceTime and stuff like this, phone calls. It makes me a little uncomfortable because it doesn't have that personal element. I love
Yeah.
spending time with people. I love
Yeah.
being next to someone. I love giving them a handshake and a hug and telling them
Yep.
that I care about them. And it's hard to do
Yeah.
that over
Yeah.
social media, over text messages, over a phone call. And
So
especially
true.
with, the kind of high tensions that are going on through social media today, that it's always kind of at a toxic or bitter place depending on where you go. And I'm sure that
Yeah.
some of the stress that people are feeling is continuing to build, and that's going to come out in the way that they speak. I know that I'm struggling with a lot of free time and a lot of time on social
Yeah.
media to maybe
Yeah.
keep my thoughts to myself when they need to be kept to myself. So that's a very good
Yeah.
point, and I think it's definitely
Yeah.
something we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's really, and that's a good word. It's restraint isn't always easy, and no, that's a good thing, I think. And I think honestly, Luke, I think you're looking at a little bit of the new normal. I think even after the way I've been phrasing it, when the outside is open again and things return somewhat back to normal, I think you're going to see these things happen. I think you'll
Yeah.
see churches that will say, "Hey, we're gathering on Sunday morning for sure, but how can we continue to gather like this for people who aren't around anymore?" Like
Yeah.
when Paul says goodbye to the Ephesian elders, and they weep because they'll never see him again. That's not the case for us. Like we
Yeah.
can literally, I can say, I'm leaving. I'll never be back here again, but I'll see you on
I'll
next
FaceTime
Tuesday.
you in 6
Yeah.
hours. Yeah.
I mean, think about that. Think about the opportunity that we have. And so I think we will see the new normal of Bible study and community, maybe membership classes, those types of things. There's a lot of things coming out of this are going to be minor tweaks to the church that we haven't even thought of yet. But
Mhm.
yep.
Yep. So yeah, I think that answers most of the questions that I have. It has been a blast to have you on. I always value your input. You've been my mentor pastor these last 2 years, and I've grown so much through that. So thank you so much for your influence, for your encouragement. Where can the listeners follow our church and your sermon feed or wherever?
Sure. You can find us at 17church, all spelled out, no numbers, 17church.org. You can find us there. There's a link to all of our sermons, video and audio. If you want to find us online or on Facebook, you can find us Facebook at 17church. Pretty easy to find. There's not a lot of church by the same name. So, yep.
We're pretty unique. I'll give us that.
We are. That's right. That's right.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Pastor Charlie. We look to have you on again in the future.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Luke.
All right. As always, thanks for joining us this week. Love God, love his church, and love your neighbor as yourself. We'll see you around.